Welcome now to the beginning of the field sessions. Before each of the field sessions, I will present a mini lecture to orient you to the types of locations and the specializations of the plants that you find there. Now, you may actually hear me say something like, well, this is the second species we've seen, when in fact you have not even seen the first species. Well, that's because the first species was filmed at lower elevation earlier on. This is because, again, that the southern Appalachians have a significant elevational variation. So spring may come as early as February or maybe even late January in the Tennessee Valley, at say around 800 feet elevation. But when you go up to 5,000 feet at the top of the Smokies, you may find that spring doesn't come until April or maybe even early May. As a result, these lessons then are going to be broken down into habitat types or location types, rather than going straight through the season from the early spring bloomers to the late spring bloomers, because they're blooming at different times at different elevations. Also, you're going to be going into different habitat types, so we want to sort of see the things that you'll see together at one time. So within those habitat types, then we will take a sort of a seasonal progression from early spring to late spring blooming. Well, let's now begin with the meadowlands. So basically stepping out your door to look for early spring. Now, late winter can seem to drag on and on, but you can start looking for signs of spring by just simply looking in your lawn. As you go to your car, to the mailbox, along the sidewalk, into a local park. Just keep a lookout for any leaves that are greening or even weedy things that look like they're expanding. And when you see that, look for small specks of color, because those may be small flowers that are just opening. Now, the lawns are interesting because they have generalist plants, and these generalist plants, in a sense, bring the world to your door. What I mean by that is that their preferences are general or broad, rather than narrow and specific. So the plants that you find there are ones that can grow in a variety of meadow-like habitats, including fairly wide drainage, slope, and soil types, so that what you find in your lawn is going to be what most people can find in their lawn. Anybody just about would have these plants in their lawns. Not only that, but they are often plants brought in from other continents. So you may have plants from Europe, Asia, even South America and Australia. Now, lawns, even though they have generalist plants, actually put restrictions or specializations on plants. They have to be plants that can tolerate trimming and mowing. Currently, most of the mowing is done by humans, but in the past, and even still in nature, the trimming is done by animals we call grazers, animals that eat grass. And of course that would be cattle, sheep, goats, horses, but also bison and elk. So the plants are specialized for those sorts of animals. These plants then tend to be mat forming, low in stature. They form these mats by either runners, that is stems that run along the surface of the ground and put up upright stems every so often, or they may be plants that have underground stems, what we call rhizomes, that again put up upright stems every so often between spaces where the grass has not actually formed a tight mat itself. Now, the plants in lawns tend to have small flowers, and there are two reasons for that. One is that the pollinators tend to be small. These are native bees, honeybees, small flies and small butterflies and moths. Part of the reason why the insects are small is because there's not very much protective cover in a lawn or a shortcut meadow. There's wind blowing across, there are predators that can see easily, so it has to be insects that can hide easily under the small leaves available. Now, since the insects are small, they need small flowers, and the small flowers need small insects. So you have the small flowers. Also, another idea is that there is inbreeding. Many of these lawn-type plants produce flowers in which the pollen actually can bend over and touch the stigma and pollinate the flower without having cross-pollination by insects or wind. So a small flower facilitates that ability. The parts are close together. And as a result, the plant is able to flower and set seed quickly. Plants of this type, however, that are inbred, there is a homogenization of the genetics, and many biologists feel that this is sort of like a weakening of the plant, which then itself leads to small flowers. Well, that's lawns, but you will want to go to other types of meadow-like habitats, fields, pastures, and grassy roadsides. Now, all of these, including lawns, are considered disturbance habitats or disturbed habitats. And again, that disturbance is due to mowing or plowing or other kinds of disturbance, which I'll talk about in just a moment. If the disturbance is not there, then what happens is that shrubs and eventually trees come in, and over time, the meadow area will become a forest. And this is a process that ecologists call succession. In fact, if you go to Cades Cove in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, you'll notice it's basically like a prairie. This is because, or it's thought that Native Americans burned this area for several hundred years, even before the European settlers came. And this allowed the area to be maintained as a grassland, a prairie, as a hunting ground for bison, elk, and deer. So let's look at these three remaining meadow-type habitats. Pastures, these are the most like lawns. They are maintained by the trimming or the mowing, but it's less frequent. So as a result, the plants tend to be taller with larger flowers. The plants also in pastures are predominantly perennial. That is, they grow from rootstocks year after year. They die back in the fall, come back from the spring, come back in the spring from the rootstock. They likewise tend to have larger pollinators, so a little bit larger bees and butterflies. So look for those. Okay, fields are somewhat different. They are plowed every year, every few years. Therefore, the plants in them have to grow from seed, and there's basically what we call a seed bank in the soil of a field. They grow from seed and are annuals or biennials, not perennials. They tend to be larger, coarser plants often than the perennials, and they will grow with crop plants or simply remain there as the field goes fallow for a year or two. Roadsides. Roadsides are different yet again because these have less disturbance than the agricultural pastures or fields. In fact, the roadsides are going to be areas that harbor lots of native species. So basically, a roadside is what's left after agricultural production has come in and the roads were built. So the plants, the native plants were there, still are able to grow. Often those rootstocks are there from before the time that fields were started. So this is often a place that you can find hard to find native species. We will actually talk about roadsides through forested areas in the section on woodland edges. Now, as you go into roadsides, you need to be aware that safety is important. So make sure your vehicle is pulled off the shoulder into a pull-out or side road. As you're walking, stay off the shoulder, stay in the right-of-way between the shoulder and the property line, and also do not trespass or go near residences. So that wraps up meadow-like habitats. So next, let's actually get into the field.